Welcome back to the WinShape Marriage Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Philo. Now, I've got to be honest with you guys, I'm a little bit of a research nerd. And lately, I've been finding myself diving deep into research specifically in the marriage space from Shaunti Feldhahn. Now, Shaunti is a social researcher who's been doing studies for years on what husbands and wives need to feel loved. And in our conversation today, we dive deep into some of her findings. This conversation is fascinating, and I think you'll find that you'll be able to use some of these points to go back to your spouse and say, what if this is true for you? So let's go ahead and jump into the episode. Shaunti Feldhahn, welcome back to the WinShape Marriage Podcast.
Oh, I'm delighted to be with you.
Now, Shaunti, I know you are on with us for our Christmas episode, but for those that might have missed the episode, could you catch us up a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I am a social researcher. I feel like my calling is to dig out all those little things that you maybe didn't know mattered. And once you are aware of them, it really helps you thrive in your relationships, marriage, parenting, that kind of thing, and in your life as a whole. So I've been doing this for 20 plus years, doing social research and writing about it and traveling and speaking.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, Shaunti, full disclosure, when I was researching and preparing for this episode, I was looking through all of the different research and studies that you've done, and I got to the point I was like, man, I need to get all these books in my Amazon cart as soon as possible. It's it's amazing how many just different pieces of research that you have. And one blog in particular caught my attention, and it was what research suggests that your husband needs and what research suggests that your wife needs. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to dive into that today and talk a little bit more about kind of what you found through that.
Absolutely. This is one of my heartbeats because we see it makes such a big difference in so many lives.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Well, let's start out with the husbands, if that works for you. Sure. In this blog that you wrote, one of the things that you mentioned husbands really look for in their wife is companionship. I think you said, based on data, most men view their wife as their best friend and are eager to spend time together. But could you talk about, when we talk about companionship with husbands, why does that make such a difference?
It is so misunderstood. In kind of the popular culture, you guys get such a bad rap. Husbands get such a bad rap.
Yeah.
It's really misunderstood in popular culture that, men just aren't romantic and, all that. And that, it turns out, really, truly is not true. This is one of the big surprises when I did because I should probably explain, this is all based on these big nationally representative surveys of men and women. We've interviewed and surveyed almost 45,000 men and women over the years.
Wow.
And in this case, I was surprised that for men, they want a best friend in their wife. They want to hang out and do things together, and they view that as being very romantic. And so I can't tell you the number of times that I heard some sweet husband say, when I tell my wife, hey, honey, you want to go to Home Depot with me? That he's proposing just the two of us out there wandering the aisles together.
Yeah.
And I love that. It really makes me happy. And it just means you got to see it that way.
Yeah. So it sounds like husbands just want someone to run to the store with them and keep them company, be there.
Yeah. Have the conversations. Well, and I'll actually be honest about something else from one of our other research projects. We did a study a number of years ago on the happiest marriages. Like, what are the secrets of the happiest couples? Maybe even things they didn't even know that they were doing that actually really mattered.
Yeah.
And this was one of them. It's fascinating, but the best marriages, husbands have something here because the best marriages, they treat each other first and foremost like best friends. And they essentially put time into hanging out. It's a sort of a misunderstanding about what makes a best friend. Because if you ask people what's the thing that's the greatest predictor of friendship,
Yeah.
I would have assumed it was things like, well, you have shared interests and, similar values, or your temperaments are, hit it off or whatever. All those things it turns out that's true. Like those things are important, but nowhere close to the main predictor of friendship, which is geographic proximity. You're the best friends with the people you see the most often.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We all know that's true, right? Like we've all had really good friends that have moved away, or we've moved away, and you still love each other, but you're just not that, you don't have that sense of intimacy. And it turns out it kind of works the same way in marriage. So the hanging out is just as valuable in many ways as arranging the big date night.
Yeah, no, I love that, because it's not like some grand romantic gesture or like secret marriage hack that you have to have. It's like, hey, let's just go to Costco together,
Exactly.
It just makes it a lot less overwhelming to feel like, hey, if I want to be a good wife, I can just go to Costco with my husband, which I love.
Yeah. Now, and of course, one of the things that I say right up front at because this is a 4-part blog series, like what husbands need most from their wives and what wives need most from their husbands. And I need to say right up front that, all these things we're talking about are assuming this is a relationship of goodwill, that this is not a coercive relationship. These are normal, average marriages who just want to make a marriage better.
Yeah.
Because it's actually a thing that if you have a marriage, for example, that's abusive, that when one partner, it's not always the husband, it could be the wife, when you have one partner that's trying to do stuff coercively, like you have to come to Costco with me, and you actually do it, like you can actually lead to more problems. And so we always tell people this is for the 99.5% of people who, really care about each other and just need a little extra help. If you're in one of the more difficult situations, get the extra help to see how these things apply.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's helpful context for sure. I was looking through this list of other pieces of research that you focused on, and this one really stuck out to me in particular. It's husbands want to know that they did a good job. I think the specific thing you said is many men subconsciously question whether they are good at what they do. Yeah. Could you talk about that a little bit when it comes into the marriage dynamic?
This is one of those things that when we as women get this, and by the way, we're talking here about marriage, but I do want to mention to the women, this applies like with our sons as well. Like this applies with men we work with. Like we think of you guys as being so confident in yourselves. Like we just assume, you think you're all that and you do a great job at everything.
Yeah.
And it's just a mask. And we don't know that often. And so this was a big surprise from the research of finding that depending on the survey, somewhere between 75 to 85% of men said underneath that, I've got a pretty significant self-doubt. Like where a woman's question kind of underneath the surface, and again, this is all data-driven, maybe more like, am I lovable? Does he really love me? What does this look like? Are we okay? Like those kinds of questions. For men, the question is more, am I able? Like, am I adequate? Am I any good at what I do? And so there's this real self-doubt, which we don't know is there, but because it is there, even something like mowing the lawn, it used to like make me so puzzled why Jeff would say, hey, did you notice? Did you see the hedges? And I'd be like, oh yeah, thanks, and just go on. And of course, like he's crestfallen because he wants someone to say you did a good job.
Yeah.
And it is one of those things that some women listening to this are going to have the same feeling that I did the first, 20 times I heard this early on. And I'm like, why should I have to tell him that? That's just, that's his job. Like, it was his turn to do the hedges. We don't realize how much of that self-doubt is underneath the surface and how life-giving it is.
Yeah.
That when we notice it and actually say it, as opposed to probably what we're doing, which is thinking about it, but it doesn't make it out of our mouth. It'll really make a difference in your marriage if you can get into the habit of it making its way out of your mouth.
Yeah. And for the wives listening to this, if you want to make your husband's week, month, maybe even year, when they get done mowing the lawn, just say, man, you did such a good job. Those lines look so straight. You did amazing with that. Because I promise you, like, they'll go back and they'll be like, man, that's amazing. I feel so good about that.
I know. But can I just say, I just want to call out something real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
So there are some women probably listening to this who, again, are doing the same thing I was doing, where we're internally kind of rolling our eyes a little bit.
Yeah.
And like, oh, great. Like, I have to stroke his ego. And, because I do a lot of like corporate work, I do women's leadership programs, whenever we talk about this in the workplace setting, there's always the rolled eyes like, oh, great, I have to stroke his ego. And one of the things that brings us up short, that we have to go, whoa, wait a minute. He doesn't have an ego. He has a deep self-doubt. It is a completely different thing when you look at it that way. And, workplace stuff, whatever, is different. But this is someone in marriage that this is your closest friend. This is your beloved. This is your friend. This is the one that you're supposed to be one with. And I was on another podcast recently where the host said, I feel like love sees a need and meets it. And I went, wow, can I use that? Because that's really good.
Yeah. Oh, I love that quote. And one of the things that you mentioned in this article was sometimes we think we use more words of affirmation than we actually do. And I can see how that could play into this particular aspect as well.
Oh, yes. One of our experiments, we did a research project a number of years ago on kindness for this intervention we call the 30-Day Kindness Challenge. And one of the things that we asked people to do when they were starting this 30-Day Kindness Challenge is to estimate how often they said words of affirmation. Right? Like, how often did they praise or say thank you or words of affirmation, whatever that is. And the average answer, the average guess was somewhere around 2 to 3 times a day. That's what most of us tend to think. And then they had to actually track it for 30 days. And they realized the real answer was 2 to 3 times a week.
Wow.
Like, so often. We're thinking it, but we just don't say it. And so, our spouse, as everybody knows, we can't read each other's minds. And so there are a lot of people who care about being praised. And it may not be just the husband, right? Like, any mom that's chasing around young kids, like, she wants some affirmation for what she's doing too.
Yeah.
But we just don't realize how often we don't actually say it.
Wow. That's really interesting for sure. And when we think about this discussion of thank you, I think back to this conversation I think you and I had at WinShape. You were talking about how you can say I love you to a husband without saying I love you. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is actually one of the the points that we were making in this series of articles. It was one of our findings. Which I need to explain that first, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So one of our other findings was that when you say, I love you to a husband, it's nice. Like, it's not like it's bad. Like, it's nice. But it doesn't hit most men in the same way that maybe I love you hits most women. And that, again, it's because statistically, under the surface, one of the things that women tend to be wondering is like, are we okay? Does he really love me? Am I lovable? Right? Like, that's under the surface. Whereas in men, like, once you get married, it's like, of course she loves me. Like, the question doesn't come up. And so, but for men, the question is, am I able? Like we talked about, right? Am I adequate? Am I any good at what I do? So what really hits men emotionally is not, I love you, as much as it is when you say thank you. Because that notices what he did, right? If it's about what he did, it notices what he did. And like, I noticed that you did the hedges. And thank you for doing that. It says, I noticed it. It was good. I appreciate it. Like, it says all these things that for most men, not all, but most, just really fills them up. But I think what you and I might have been talking about, if I'm remembering, is that sometimes we can have the no thank you, thank you. This is what the guys described it as, which is, oh, thanks for, cleaning up the hedges, but you missed a spot.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. And, I am like the queen of that. Like there are literally sometimes, because Jeff and I do a lot of marriage events, marriage conferences and all that kind of stuff. And there will literally be times where I'll be standing on stage and explaining this, and I see him look at me sideways because I just did whatever it is. Like, this doesn't always come natural to me, and I wrote the stupid book. But one of the things that we do is we will point out, we're trying to be helpful. Oh, you missed a spot. We don't realize that for him, that's like the opposite of good. That is actually pointing out to him, what you did there on the outside, what you did wasn't good enough. You failed. And again, we don't see it that way. We're just trying to help. But it's about learning what's in the heart and mind of your spouse. It might be different from you.
And you're sitting there saying, like, I just complimented them on all of this, and I just pointed out the one thing in the gutters. And they're sitting there thinking, why did I miss the one thing in the gutters? How could I let that happen? I could totally see that play out for sure. But.
Yeah, and not just how could I let that happen, but oh, great. Like, I spent 5 hours on the yard and this and that and the other thing, and you have to criticize me instead of just appreciating it. And again, just for any men listening to this, I promise you that is not what we're thinking.
Yeah.
But this, again, it truly is, okay, if we are different, then these things are kind of like raw nerves. And you can hit your spouse's nerve and never intend to. And so one of the things we spend a lot of time doing based on the research in this blog and in our books is, okay, what are the things that we can avoid in those raw nerves if we can? Can't always, but if we can. And what are the things that build us up instead?
Yeah, I love that. Now, Shaunti, we spent some time talking a little bit about the husbands. I'd love to dedicate at least a couple of minutes to talk about the wives. Help me out here as a husband.
I know. Well, all the women are yelling at you right now. Like, come on. When are we going to get to the other side?
Hey, I can hear it. But we'll get to them. So this first point that stuck out to me, talking about what wives need, you said to be shown that she is loved and lovable. And you said that in your book, For Men Only, 82% of women have an underlying insecurity about whether or not their men really love them. Yeah. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, this is the essential point here. And this is when Jeff and I do those marriage conferences. Jeff always says this and then just waits for it to sink in. Because you men, your wife needs to feel that you love them, right? You know she needs to feel loved. What you don't realize is how easy it is for her to not feel loved. And you don't realize that because, again, we have maybe some different raw nerves running out of the surface, different insecurities, different things that kind of hit us the wrong way. And just like with men, the am I able, am I any good at what I do kind of question is in there. With women, it's the am I lovable question. And that does not go away just because you get married. For you men, you see your wife walk down the aisle and, stand at the altar and you say your I do's and you're like, okay, on to the next thing.
Yeah.
There is no switch in a woman's brain that gets flipped to the, oh, now I feel permanently loved position.
Yeah.
And instead, that question in marriage just morphs to, does he really love me?
Mm.
Like, is he glad he married me? Like, are we okay? Would he choose me all over again?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we found that was present in 82% of women. And depending on the survey, it was anywhere, again, from like upper 70s to mid 80s.
Yeah. And as a man, when I hear that, that definitely sounds super weighty. I mean, what are some practical things that the guys listening can do to show their wife that they're lovable and capable of being loved?
I am going to give you something that you are going to not believe is true.
Okay.
Okay. All right. But this is true. All right. This is backed up by all these big expensive studies that we did.
Yeah.
So one of the things that matters the most, you have two things that'll really matter. One is preventative and one is responsive,
Mm-hmm.
and one is preventative. So the responsive one is if you have been like as an argument over breakfast, say, and the emotions are running high and you have to run to a meeting, as you drive away, for you, probably for most men, this is what we tend to find, most men kind of click off the thought of that argument.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's in the back of your mind, it's gone, and you're kind of hoping when you drive back in for dinner that she's done the same thing.
Yep.
Right? Like
guilty as charged. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we ask women, have you done the same thing? All the women like shake their heads. They're like, no. And here's what's actually going on. It's not that she's holding a grudge or refusing to let something go. It's that insecurity, that raw nerve has been triggered. And it's risen up and she's kind of going, are we okay? And so it is a powerful thing to respond when you're in conflict, when you want to withdraw, when you just can't think anymore and you need to get away. Before you do, if you will say something like, honey, I'm really upset. I need to go to this meeting. I need to process, but I want you to know we're okay. That is huge for most women. I can't remember the exact number, but it was something like 95% of women. It was almost 100%. It wasn't 100, but it was really close. So that's the responsive thing.
Yeah.
That if the nerve has been triggered, but there's something that's even better, and it's little that can prevent the nerve from being triggered in the first place, even if you did something that would otherwise hit it. And you're building a sense of security under your wife by pursuing her every day. Now, most men, they're like, I don't know what you mean by pursuing her. And here's the way that we tend to put it. It's you actually know what this looks like because it's what you did when you were dating. And now most men also are like, wait a minute, that was exhausting. I got married so I could stop doing that stuff. When we say pursuit, we are not talking about what you're thinking. You're thinking about arranging the big candlelight dinner, right? Okay, that stuff is nice, but that's not what we're talking about. When you were dating, you were sending her a message every day. And that message was, I love you today. I want you today. I want you to be mine today. And it was little things. And it's the same exact message that she needs to hear every day for the rest of your life. But you can send her that message by something as simple as reaching across and taking her hand when you're walking through a parking lot. That's it.
Yeah.
That says, I would choose you all over again. Or, you're sitting together at church and you put your arm around her in church. That says, you're mine. I'm so glad I married you. Or you text her in the middle of the day and just say, this has been a really rough day. I've just been thinking about you. I love you so much. I can't wait to see you tonight. You press send. She will screenshot that text message.
Yeah.
It's just little bitty things like that are sending that signal every day. And I promise you, to all the men listening to this, what? Seriously, ask your wife what are those little things that matter and do them And there will be such a sense of security underneath her that even when you might otherwise have hit that nerve, that insecurity, that question just doesn't come up because she knows you love her.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to use that one for sure. As far as just
good.
like the small things, like just reaching out and holding their hand or sending a text. Like you said, it's so easy. And as a guy, I feel like it feels like a lot more complicated than it actually is. But I mean, those little things really do make such a difference, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the perfect transition to our next point. We were talking about holding a hand or putting an arm around your wife during a church service or something like that. Yeah. You had these two pieces of research, and I thought they were really interesting. You said 82% of women said reaching out to hold their hand while walking at, like in a park or at the movies or something, would be deeply pleasurable to them. You said 74% reported being deeply pleased by putting an arm around them in public. Yeah. So talk just a little bit more about how that impacts a marriage.
Here's one of the things that this happened relatively recently at one of our marriage events, and I'm dying to test this on the next survey. So one of the things that we do is we have a program, an interactive program called Slido, where we have people do it's anonymous polling. Okay, we've told you what the national research says. Now, what about the people here in this room, right? And it's all anonymous, so people can be really honest, and it's really helpful. And one of the things that we always do is ask both the men and the women to fill in 5 words or less of what would be the little things that would really speak life into you, like these things that we're talking about.
Yeah. And
in the last one this event that we just did in Texas or something, the word cloud, we have it made into a word cloud.
Yeah.
So that everybody can kind of see it and take a picture of it. And
like the more common the response, the bigger the word is on the cloud. Yeah.
And then maybe ask their spouse, would this matter to you? And in the middle of the word cloud, in the biggest font, came up the words spontaneous gestures of affection.
Oh.
And every woman was like, yes, spontaneous gestures of affection, because it says, I care about you. I love you so much. It's simple, but it really matters. So I cannot wait to test that on one of our next surveys.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
That kind of captures what you're talking about here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think, in marriage, it's so easy to fall back into routines and rhythms and just do the same thing every single day. And so breaking out and doing something spontaneous that's like, hey, I love you, I'm choosing you, that. Yeah. That's such an easy way, it sounds like, to
it just, all it takes, if you're walking, through the parking lot into church, it just takes thinking about it, to take her hand. That's something, I guarantee you that's something you did when you were dating.
Yeah.
Don't stop.
Yeah.
Don't stop.
Keep doing it. Oh, no, I love that. Now, Shaunti, this last point that I'll touch on with you in our conversation today is another one that really stuck out to me, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. But you talked about the importance for women of deep security in you and not necessarily just your finances. And you said 70% of women would give up financial security if it was necessary to get emotional security. Talk about that a little bit.
This is, of all of the research findings, we've been doing this research for almost 22 years now. Of all of our research findings, this is the one that the target audience has the hardest time believing. It is very, very difficult for most men to believe that what their wives most want from them is not a paycheck. The paycheck's great. The financial provision is awesome. It's appreciated, especially if you're in a family where the husband is the primary breadwinner.
Yeah.
All of that is good and it's appreciated. But what she most wants is you more than anything that you could provide. And most men just have a really hard time believing that could possibly be true. But we found this, and we actually, one of the things that a lot of men kind of said when, we would share these things, and they were like, yeah, she says that now, but let's wait until things are hard and then see if she believes that, right? Yeah. And what we actually found on the survey, we already tested that. And we found that the women who were in the most difficult financial space were more likely to say that what they most needed was him.
Wow.
And the way one woman put it, see if I can remember, she said something like, look, if we're in a really dire financial, and actually this woman was in a dire financial situation, if memory serves.
Yeah.
She was in a really, really, I think her husband had lost his job. And she's like, if you're in a really dire financial situation, but you're close, you can get through anything. But you can have all the money in the world, and if you're not close, all that money doesn't mean very much.
Yeah. No, it makes sense for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, like when you hear it that way, that in the survey, you already asked people on the lower end of the income spectrum, and they confirmed what you're saying. It's just affirmation that emotional connection really does matter. But
it's not that the finances don't. And again, this was 70% of married women. That means by definition, 30% were the opposite, that they did prioritize financial security. So, and 30%, okay, that's almost a third. That's a big number too.
Yeah.
But the key for the men, any men listening to this, is ask your spouse. And if you've been hearing your wife say things like, honey, why are you working so much? Like, I really want you to be able to come to Susie's volleyball game. Well, yeah, I would love to go to the volleyball game too, but, I've got to take these overtime hours, in order to pay for whatever. Recognize, actually, your wife may want something different than what you're trying to provide. She may want you to provide your presence more and be willing to cut back on the finances if you could just go to Susie's volleyball games.
Yeah. And I think that's the perfect point for us to end on is for all of these points, I know that's great research, but use this as a conversation starter to go back to your spouse and say, hey, I heard this on the WinShape Marriage Podcast. Is this true for you? And use that information to inform how you show love and care to your spouse.
Yeah. The solution to a lot of this is to just be able to go, is this true of you? And to start the conversation. Yeah.
Shaunti, I love that so much. Thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
And for those listening, thank you for tuning into this episode of the WinShape Marriage Podcast, and we'll catch you back here next week.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this conversation, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more marriage resources. And let us know what you think of this episode in the comments below.